Hi there, Phil here, and I'm from the Aquascapeguide.com. Guess what? We decided to create an entire series just on algae. We're going to cover the most common algae we see in the hobby. We'll help identify each one, cover how to remove it from your tank, but most importantly, go over the root cause of it so we can prevent it from coming back. So if you have not already, check out the algae playlist on our YouTube channel. Alrighty, I'm going to start each of these out by saying, 1. Most algae can be corrected with weekly water changes and tank maintenance. This includes a 50% water change weekly when there is no issue and up to 75% weekly if there is an issue. This also includes removing any detritus or mold buildup in the tank, cleaning out our canister's pre-filter sponges, and even every 2 to 3 months siphoning out the sludge in your aqua soil. The removal of this rotting organic matter prevents dissolved organic compounds from building up, thus preventing algae. And 2, we never suggest adding more livestock to act as a cleanup crew. Most algae present themselves due to an imbalance of organics in our tank, so adding more little poop factories into our tank can further throw off the balance. And lastly, at ASG, we teach to focus on keeping your plants super happy, and they will deal with the algae. When your plants are super happy, they produce something called oleochemicals. These oleochemicals are a natural defense mechanism against algae. Happy plants means no more algae. So if you have not already, make sure you go through either ASG University, which you can sign up for free on our website, or at a minimum, our Part 1 playlist on YouTube. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about this dreaded blackbeard algae. Don't worry, we've helped hundreds overcome this algae in the past, so we've got you covered. And moving forward, we're just going to call it BBA. So what is BBA? BBA is a very recognizable hair algae that is dark in color, and when it gets long enough, it can move like a short grass in the current. It loves to grow on rough surfaces on your tank, like on your rock or wood hardscape, and can even grow on the edges of plants' leaves. There is a generic hair algae that can grow in similar patterns, but it's generally stiffer and light green in color, which is staghorn, and we'll cover that in another video. Another similar hair algae is filamental algae, but this one gets real long and is really light green. But as you can see, BBA stays really short, is really dark in color, and it will spread itself out. The two most common causes for BBA are 1, an imbalance of phosphates to nitrates in your tank. Basically, your phosphates are too high for where your nitrates are at, which we'll go into more depth a little later in this video. And 2, issues with your CO2. Either your CO2 is fluctuating too much, or is being depleted throughout the photo period because you have a bunch of plants in the tank and they're totally soaking up all that carbon. 2 less common causes of BBA, which we'll cover at the end of the video, are 1, too much CO2 in a dead spot of your tank. If the circulation in your tank is poor, BBA will totally grow on the ceramic part of your CO2 diffuser in your tank. And 2, high flow areas in your tank. So BBA will literally attach itself to power heads due to the strong current or flow. So how do we get rid of this stuff? Okay, so these methods we're about to mention will not prevent BBA from coming back. We'll address that shortly. But first, we need to at least kill it or get rid of it. Here are a few ways you can do that. The first method of treatment is treating it with hydrogen peroxide. If you can, we suggest you remove the affected plant or hardscape from the tank before you treat it. All you gotta do is fill up a little squirt bottle with hydrogen peroxide that is 3% in concentration and spray the affected area. Then just let it sit for 30 seconds to a minute. Just don't let the plant dry out. The reason that we suggest to remove the affected area from the tank is so that you can rinse it really well before putting it back into the aquarium. Too much hydrogen peroxide in your tank can kill livestock, so that's why we're trying to be cautious. Another way you can miss things down is during a water change, while the water level is really low. Do your 50% water change, and if something is poking up above the water surface, you can give it a little spritz of hydrogen peroxide. Now, if you're feeling extra saucy and want to do this underwater, you can fill a syringe with hydrogen peroxide and shoot it at the affected areas. If you do plan on heading this route, you need to be aware of 2 things. 1, hydrogen peroxide can kill off the beneficial bacteria in our canister filter. So you want to make sure that you turn off all power heads and filtration prior to treating plants in the water column. And 2, as stated prior, too much hydrogen peroxide in the tank can kill your livestock. Now, we just finished writing an in-depth article on how to use hydrogen peroxide to get rid of hair algae. We'll put a link in the description below to that article, but the general consensus is not to exceed 3 milliliters per gallon. So just make sure you don't go too crazy with this stuff. Okay, the next form of treatment is a little more aggressive, and it's a bleach dip. There is very little that can survive a bleach dip. All you gotta do is mix 1 part bleach with 20 parts of lukewarm water. More sensitive plants like crypts do not dip for longer than 90 seconds. Hardier plants like anubis can be dipped for around 150 seconds. Whatever plant you end up dipping, just try not to dip the roots. Most of the time you can just turn the plant upside down and only dip the affected leaves. Unfortunately, you cannot dip mosses. When you're done processing your dip, make sure that you rinse any plant that you dipped really well with dechlorinated water. A bleach dip will not dissolve BBA, it'll just turn it red. And after a couple of days, you should be able to rub it off with your fingers. If rubbing it off doesn't work, then you'll need to trim off the affected leaves over time. If it's on the hardscape, then you can use a wire brush to brush it away. Just make sure to siphon out any pieces that might be floating around your tank. We want to remove as much of that as possible. And the last treatment that we would recommend, but don't necessarily care for, is Seachem Excel. Excel is a glutaraldehyde-based algaecide, and it's great for killing BBA over time. Just dose it as directed, and you'll see the BBA turn red, which means it's dead. Just know that glutaraldehyde can kill other sensitive plants like boosts, mosses, crypts, jungle vow, even if you use it as directed. So just keep an eye on your plants, and watch what they're telling you. Once the BBA is dead, you can just scrub it off your plants or hardscape, or trim out the affected areas. If you want to learn more about Seachem Excel, we have a video on it. We'll throw a link in the description below. Now, if you don't want to use a dip solution or a chemical like Seachem Excel, so long as you take the preventative measures to ensure it doesn't come back, you can simply trim it out over time, and you should not see BBA return. Okay, Mr. Smarty Pants, give me them preventative measures then. How do we prevent BBA from showing back up in our tanks? I'm going to say this in all of our algae videos. We need to make changes on how we've designed our aquariums, otherwise the algae will just keep coming back. The definition of crazy is doing the same thing over and over, yet expecting different results. As stated before, do not rely on fish, algae eaters, shrimps, snails, whatever, to fix the design flaw in your aquarium. So let's talk about solutions, starting with phosphates. As stated in the beginning of the video, one of the most common reasons for hair algae, including BBA, is high phosphates. There's something referred to as the Redfield ratio, which studied the ratio in which plants uptake phosphates to nitrates. And we found that if you keep the nutrients level within your tank within the Redfield ratio, you generally avoid any algae that would present themselves from high phosphates. Originally, we understood this ratio to be around 1 part per million of phosphate for every 16 parts per million of nitrates. We know more now that all plants are a little different, and it's closer to a 1:5 or a 1:7 ratio of phosphates to nitrates. Just to be on the safe side, we suggest that you keep a 1:10 ratio, so 1 part per million of phosphate to 10 parts per million nitrates, just to make sure we're on the leaner side and we don't excite hair algae. But when the phosphates get a little too high in our tank compared to nitrates, it can become a big issue, causing all types of hair algae. If you're dealing with hair algae and want to troubleshoot them, we suggest you pick up an API phosphate test kit to check where your phosphates are in relation to your nitrates. We'll put a link in the description below. Just note that once you reduce your phosphates, it could take 2 to 3 weeks after removing all the algae for it to subside. But be patient and keep them phosphate levels under control. So you're probably asking yourself, where are these phosphates coming from? How do we mitigate them to prevent the algae from coming back? Well, one way phosphates could be entering your tank is through your tap water. Yeah, you heard me correctly, tap water. You could be doing more harm than good by processing water changes. So the first thing I tell hobbyists to do is to check their tap water to make sure they're not adding fuel to the fire by processing water changes. If your tap water has phosphates in it, the best way to remove them is by using an RODI filter, which we talk about in our water chemistry video. We'll put a link to Aquatic Life's RO Buddy, which is one of our favorite little RODI filters. But basically, the RODI unit scrubs the water of everything in your tap water, leaving you with pure H2O. Then we can put back only the minerals needed for a healthy planted tank, thus removing the phosphate before it can even enter our tank. Another way phosphates can be introduced into our aquarium is from cheap flake food or dried fish foods. Phosphates are used as preservatives, so if you have a lot of fish and you're feeding them a lot, you could be introducing too many phosphates into your tank manually. We generally only see flake foods being an issue if you're overfeeding or just not processing water changes, and the phosphates that you are adding to your tank build up over time. You can either try reducing your feeding or switch to a more nutrient-dense food, like brine shrimp, bloodworms, or even the mixed frozen pack. You'll notice your fish will appreciate the higher quality food as well. And if you are sticking to dry foods, only feed what your livestock will eat within 3 to 5 minutes, and keep up on your 50% water changes weekly. That way you'll never get a buildup of phosphates in the water column. Another source of phosphates can be buffers that, quote-unquote, help you fix your water chemistry. And this is a great reason to stop using these chemicals to fix our water chem. A lot of Seachem's buffers heavily rely on phosphates to help deliver the chemicals that are needed to adjust your aquarium's water chemistry. These dissolve into the water column and can push you outside the Redfield ratio. The more of a buffering agent you use, the higher chances you'll run into hair algae. Again, this is another reason why we suggest not to rely on buffers to fix your water chemistry. To learn how to properly adjust your GH, KH, and pH, check out our water chemistry video in the description and stop relying on these easy fixes. Okay, one of the last ways phosphates can be introduced into your aquarium is if you designed your tank with capped organic potting soil. It's always best to replace it with an aqua soil, as organic soils can leach phosphates into the water column. Oh no, but I put a sand cap over it. Even with a sand cap, we can observe phosphates leaching into the water column. Furthermore, anytime you move a plant out of the substrate, it's going to kick a bunch of organics, including phosphates, into your water column. The release of phosphates can subside over time, but if you're not processing water changes, the phosphates will just build up. If you do want to switch out your organic potting soil with an aquarium soil, we recommend using something like fluval stratum, as it's not really packed with nutrients, even though fluval says it is. But the good part about that is it won't leach ammonia for weeks after installation, causing staghorn algae. Oops, I've said too much. Ammonia is the root cause of staghorn, but we'll get to that in another video. But back to stratum. Even though it's not packed with nutrients and will not raise your ammonia, it still does have a high CEC, which allows it to soak up liquid fertilizers that we dose in the water column. Which leads me to, if you haven't already, check out the ASG fertilization kit. We purposely designed it to have low phosphates so you don't run into hair algae in your aquarium. Or if you already have high phosphates in your tank due to your tap water or feeding dry foods, you can just omit the phosphates from your fertilizer and rely on the natural sources in your tank. Pretty cool, huh? We'll put a link in the description below to the ASG fertilization kit. Just remember to use YT15 at checkout to save 15% on your order. Now, when troubleshooting other hobbyists' tank, we suggest starting with checking your phosphates in the aquarium, as it's a cheap test kit and phosphates are one of the major causes of hair algae, like BBA. So what if you do buy a kit and you find out your phosphates are fine, and your tank is heavily planted, then it might be a CO2 depletion issue. So let's dive into that. The second biggest common cause of BBA in an aquarium is either fluctuating carbon levels or carbon depletion altogether. If you have very little plant mass in a tank, it's probably not a carbon issue and probably more of a phosphate issue. But if you have a heavily planted tank, then it's probably an issue with your carbon levels. Let's cover the most common carbon issues. The first is too little carbon in your tank altogether. BBA is seen in a lot of planted tanks that are not injecting CO2. So why is that, might you ask? Because water naturally carries 3 to 4 parts per million of carbon in any given time. Once the lights kick on and the plants start to photosynthesize, thus absorbing available carbon, we can run into an issue where carbon levels get so low, bottoming out, thus creating an environment in which BBA can thrive. Another example of a carbon issue is fluctuating CO2 levels. This generally happens when someone is new to CO2 injection and they're not injecting enough, or it could be from a new hobbyist using a DIY system. DIY CO2 systems rely on a natural reaction where something like yeast and sugar produce CO2, but in the beginning the yeast starts out really strong, creating a lot of CO2. And as there's less and less sugar available for them to eat over time, their output starts to taper off, having it produce less and less CO2. Furthermore, temperatures raising and lowering can cause increase and decrease CO2 production from yeast. Both of these can cause fluctuating CO2 levels, again inviting BBA to take over. So what can one do about fluctuating or depleted carbon sources? Well, our first answer is going to suggest that you start injecting CO2. It's really not that hard to get into. but it is a little pricey. However, we have many videos and resources on how to get into pressurized CO2 systems. And once you start injecting CO2, you'll notice that you have less algae issues as your plants are thriving. That, and you'll never have to deal with BBA again, so long as your phosphates don't creep up on you. Done and done. But okay, let's be realistic. Not everyone can get into CO2 injection right now. We'll go over some remedies that don't require CO2 injection here in a minute. But what if you're injecting CO2, your phosphates are fine, but you're still getting BBA? Most likely you're not injecting enough and your carbon is fluctuating, or worse, bottoming out. If you are unaware, we need to inject enough CO2 to obtain a full point pH drop prior to your lights coming on, and then we need to maintain that 1 point pH drop through the entire photo period. This will help us achieve the optimal level of carbon, which is around 30 parts per million. If you're not getting that full point pH drop before your lights turn on, or the pH is raising back up during the photo period, you'll need to either improve your method of diffusion or turn up your CO2 flow a little more. We highly suggest that you don't rely on drop checkers to tell you if you have that full point pH drop, as there are many points of failure for a drop checker. Simply get yourself a pH test kit or a pH pen if you're fancy, links in the description below, and learn how to test your pH to get it to optimal levels. If you're unaware of the pH drop method, we talk about this approach in our Guide to CO2 video. If your CO2 is to the max and you're still not getting that 1 point pH drop, then you need to look into a more efficient method of diffusion, like an inline atomizer from CO2 Art or a CO2 reactor from Nylog. Okay, but what if you really don't want to get into CO2 injection? Let's cover some ways in which you can keep your natural levels of carbon elevated. The first thing you'll want to do is promote equilibrium by creating surface agitation. Promoting equilibrium will basically replenish any gases that are naturally low in your water column. So if your carbon is low, it'll boost it back up. We achieve this by creating ripples across your water's surface. We don't want any white water splashing, just some nice little ripples. This rippling effect breaks the water's surface tension, promoting gaseous exchanges. I generally achieve this with the outlet of my canister filter. If you position the filter's outlet close enough to the water's surface, you'll get a little rippling effect. Extra points if you're running a surface skimmer on the inlet side of things as well. That removes the oily looking surface scum on your water's surface. This surface scum prevents gaseous exchanges, which is the opposite of what we're trying to do here. Another approach to keeping your carbon levels up is we can give the tank a little light nap in the middle of the day or photo period. I know this sounds funny, but turning your lights off midday for 2 hours or more will shut down photosynthesis and allow natural CO2 levels to replenish. And will happen quicker if you have proper surface agitation. For example, we suggest you only run your tank's lights for around 8 hours a day, but we can break that photo period up into 2 cycles. We can have one 4-hour cycle run in the morning, and we can enjoy the tank while we get ready for our day. Then it shuts off in the middle of the day and turns back on for another 4 hours in the afternoon or evening. The time between those 2 photo periods will allow natural levels of CO2 to be replenished. If you want a really short light nap, we suggest to have the light off for at least 2 hours. So at minimum, 4 hours on, 2 hours off, and then another 4-hour photo period to finish off the day. Okay, now the last 2 options we're not a huge fan of, but it will help prevent BBA. The first is utilizing glutaraldehyde. I'm not proud to be recommending this, but something like Seachem Excel will prevent BBA in tanks that are not injecting CO2. The reason I don't like recommending this is because it feels like we are just putting a band-aid on the issue, and we're not actually addressing the root cause of CO2 depletion. We are just sidestepping the issue with a chemical. Seachem does say that the byproduct of glutaraldehyde breaking down in the aquarium provides a small amount of carbon, but it's such at a nominal amount that it doesn't even come close to CO2 injection. So it can help combat BBA, but then you're just tied to dosing bottles of Excel all the time, thus delaying you for saving up for a proper pressurized CO2 kit. So not our first choice for BBA prevention, but it is an approach, so we thought we'd mention it. The last approach, which we're not a fan of, we can slow down the uptake of carbon by decreasing the PAR of your light. You can either dim your light, or raise it up a couple inches, or put some tape over every other inch of the light. But reducing the PAR of your light will slow down growth rates, and the uptake of nutrients and carbon. If you're not injecting CO2, we suggest that you do not exceed 80 par for your light. If you're around 80 par now, then you may need to decrease the intensity of your light down to 65 or 70 par. Again, we're not a huge fan of this approach because the lower you go with your par, the less happy your plants are going to be. But sometimes just reducing the par a little bit, along with a light nap and some surface agitation, can make all the difference. Now you might be asking yourself, how do some people get away with not injecting CO2 at all and never run into BBA? You've seen that guy online. I don't inject any CO2 and the nutrients I use is fish poop. Well, some of the ways people are getting around CO2 injection is that they have a large enough body of water that the plants don't bottom out the carbon in the water column. Surface agitation can be enough to keep natural levels of CO2 high enough for these hobbyists. They are probably also using a low par light, which slows down carbon intake, which we talked about. In addition, they probably have really slow growing plants, like Anubis, Java Fern, and other epiphytes. This is why they're considered beginner plants. They are hardy and slow growing. So don't let someone fool you by saying, I don't inject CO2, you shouldn't as well. They might have a different setup than you that allows them to not inject CO2. Regardless, CO2 injection is always going to increase the health of your planted tank and help keep your plants thriving, thus fending off algae. Now that we've got the most common reasons for BBA out of the way, let's quickly go over some less common reasons for BBA. The first is BBA can occur in areas with too much CO2. Yeah, you heard me. We sometimes see BBA growing on our CO2 diffusers, which is the opposite of what you'd think. But too high of CO2 saturation can also cause BBA. For example, if your diffuser is in the corner of your tank and you're not getting proper water circulation, CO2 saturated water can build up in the corner, causing BBA to grow in your diffuser. This is a more rare case, but can still happen. To fix this issue, you would just increase circulation with a power head, or position the outlet of your filter so it's moving the water around your tank a little better. Overall, you just need a little more circulation in the tank. But not too much circulation, because another rare case of BBA can be caused by really high water flow. Now, I'm not talking water trickling out of a hang-on back filter, but we're talking about putting a massive power head in a 30-gallon tank. We will sometimes see BBA actually growing on that power head. Now, we're not sure why BBA prefers it, but it will grow in really high flow areas. To fix this, you just would slow down the power head a little bit. If you need to increase circulation in your tank, just don't get one that's like overly big, or get an adjustable DC power head. Most tanks, in our opinion, do benefit from a smaller power head. Most of the time, adequate circulation can be achieved with our canister filter, so long as we're getting close to 10 times turnover. Now you understand why we recommend this. If you haven't already, check out our filtration video in our Part 1 playlist. Alrighty, that's it for the more rare cases of BBA. We thought they were worth mentioning as you can be injecting CO2, get your 1-point pH drop, have your phosphates at perfect levels, and still get BBA on your diffuser due to poor circulation. So, let's recap. BBA is a dark, hair-like algae generally caused by a phosphate imbalance or carbon issue within our tank. We are always going to suggest to inject CO2 because it helps promote plant health and prevent algae like BBA. If you can't inject CO2, you can always create ripples on your water surface to promote equilibrium, while breaking up your 8-hour light cycle with a 2-hour nap between. You could always dose Seachem XL or reduce the par of your light, but those could have negative impacts on your tank's health. Just know that you could be injecting CO2 and doing everything right, but still get BBA on your diffuser or high flow areas like the outlet nozzle of your canister or on a power head. As stated at the beginning, focus on making your plants super happy, and they will handle the algae for you. When plants are happy, they produce oleochemicals, which are a natural defense mechanism for algae. But they can only produce these chemicals when they are thriving. As they say, 1 ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. To circle it all back, if you're not currently running the ASG method, we highly encourage you to join our free website and take the ASG University, or at minimum, watch Part 1 playlist on our YouTube channel. Also, feel free to reach out in the comments sections if you have any questions, like and subscribe if this video has helped you, and share it with others that are battling the dreaded BBA. Okay, we have a ton more of these algae videos to create, so we gotta go. But we'll see you in the next episode in the series, which is Staghorn algae. Later, scapers!